Yo, what is up everyone? Tachi here. So we are going to be talking about salad grids today. And for, again, those unaware, salad grids refer to grids that are mixed. So that is people who are running usually 3 or 4 of the weapon types, right? As a damage dealer. Perhaps 2, but 2 is pretty typical, I would say. I think that's less salad. I don't know what you would call it. Steak and rice. Whatever the hell you guys want to call it. Basically, it is running your grid with a mix of weapons, right? So I've seen some arguments against it that don't really make any sense. And probably the worst argument I saw, or not even necessarily an argument, I think they tried to push it more as a fact, was that a grid that is 95k will do more damage than a grid that is 120k but spread out. So let me show it so that you guys get an idea. If you were to just do blade, my most common weapon, up to S or whatever, although a lot of these are not upgraded, and you know what, fuck it, let's throw in some axes. Now we are 26k, 27k below my main grid. To say that this grid would do more damage than my mix grid is a lie. Let's look at my salad grid. My salad grid is at 38,357. That's about a 6,000 stat difference. At least last I checked, even a mere 2,000 stat difference. So that is to say, even a mixed grid with a mere 2,000 attack higher than a specialized grid would do more damage overall in comparison. So something as high as that difference, it doesn't make any sense. Now, that being said, there is a very, very big exception here. And the exception there is with Paladin class at the moment with Half Nightmare. And that is specifically because it is not just a mere 10% that you are losing, which yes, it does add up, but realistically speaking, a 10% difference, it's really not that huge, because at the end of the day, all of that functions off of your attack as well. So your attack stat is slightly more important. I also want to address the counter arguments to that, and that is to say that salad grids are good. They're actually what people should be doing. That really depends on the individual case by case basis. There are players that their grids are significantly better specialized. I already gave one example, which is in the off chance that you happen to be running Half Nightmare and you do have enough spears that the drop in damage isn't much. In my case, I have just enough spears that the difference in damage is still in my favor running Half Nightmare as opposed to Salad. And then there's other examples like, well, he doesn't have it equipped right now, but Yagami, he's running with 12 swords, and I believe he is probably going to increase that, but the stat increase from running the, I believe he has like 3 spears and maybe 1 or 2 axes. The difference in stats is just high enough that the increase in stats from running those axes or whatever other weapons it happens to be, ideally it would be axes, is good enough that it outweighs the 10% job correction, and he does more damage in the entire grid overall due to that. So there are exceptions like that, and of course some people might call that salad, but realistically speaking, running sword axe is not, it's not really a salad grid. It really isn't. Ideally, of course, running spears is not that great, and I might have to see whether or not him running 1 or 2 spears is worth it, because obviously, yes, your magic attack will be high as well. I believe his magic attack is also like 40k-ish or so, but it's a big enough gap between that and the physical attack that it would probably be better to just run swords that are SR. But we'll see. I'll have to like look into that. I'll math it out, and then obviously on top of that, you have to account for the skill damage ratios, because obviously an SR weapon will have lower ratios, typically, not always. And as well as that, you have to account for DC, which as well, on top of many other factors, could play into whether or not it's worth it to run maybe instead of 12 swords that are all L, which is probably what he's running right now, if not 13. Maybe it's better to run 16, 3 or 4 of those being SRs, which are S base, of course, with DC. Maybe the DC will be a big enough difference that even with the lower skill ratios, it's still worth it. But yeah, that's definitely something you'd have to math out. But typically, I'd say that running L axes would be better in that situation. But what do I know? I have to math it out. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that is the case. It's actually a very long process. Like, take out a weapon, put in a different weapon, take out a weapon, put in a different weapon, and try that to see which deck, or basically the entire grid once you use it, which one does the most damage. Even that isn't necessarily entirely accurate in terms of depicting whether or not the grid is worth using. So it is difficult, but it has to be done on an individual basis. That would make it slightly more easy to tell whether or not you can use salad or not. And then what you want to do with the rest of the slots is, after you have all your L swords, the 12 to 14, whatever amount that you happen to have, the final slots are ideally to be used on axes, preferably L axes. And the reason why is because even though they don't have the 10% bonus, because they have probably higher stats than your SR swords, which are S evolved, the difference in attack will be considerable enough that having L axes will increase your stats so high that your swords will do more damage and the axes will do more damage in comparison to if you were to have the SR swords. I know I'm getting kind of confused here with my ADHD, but basically that's what it means. Now, the reason why you wouldn't want those to be spears is because even though your stats may be higher with spears, let's say 2 or 3 spears that have like 2,300 physical attack for whatever reason, some of them do. The reason why is because your magic attack, as you guys can clearly see, will be so much lower that the difference in damage output would make it so that even an SR sword, which is an S evolved again, would probably do more than the actual spear. It depends on your guild, I guess. In my guild right now, since he is a specialized physical attacker, Yagami is mostly receiving physical attack buffs, so he's usually really low in magic attack buffs, which makes his spears do like basically fucking nothing. So that's a pretty big deal, right? If you're only doing like 1,500 damage or like 2,000 damage on your spears to 2 targets, that's 5k, as opposed to doing 10k on an SR sword. That's a pretty fucking big difference. So it's very important for you to like keep these things in mind. And on top of that, obviously, there are a bunch of SR swords. Well, I guess there's a bunch of S swords with DC 1, and the ones with DC 1, even if they have lower stats, it's better to use them. It's really convoluted. You really have to keep that all in mind. Typically, I would suggest this. This is basically the end all be all for specialized grids at the moment. You want to have more than likely around 10 L swords. You want to have probably another 2 to 4 SR swords that are S base evolved. And then the final 5 to 6 slots, depending on your cost, you might have to only have 19 weapons. It happens. The final slots, you want them to be axes, preferably L axes, but if you can't do as many L axes as you can, more than likely it's around 2 or 3. And then use the final slot on SR axes, and that's it. That is the best grid that you can have if you want to be specialized. And it is much better than running, let's say, I think Yagami is running at the moment, he's running 10 swords, I think like 5 spears and 4 axes. Those 5 spears do so little damage based on his magic attack that I really don't think it's worth it. I really don't. And looking at the damage that he does with those spears, at least contextually, and maybe there was some situation, but even with a level 1 spear doing that little damage, and I'll flash it up on the screen, I really don't think it's worth it. So again, hopefully you guys understand what I'm saying. I'm going on like a little bit of a ramble at this point, but yeah. that is the end of this video. Hopefully you guys found it informative, and if you did, feel free to share it around, whatever. Like, subscribe. I'm out. Have a nice day.